Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Japan Politics Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Whittaker, and thank you for joining us. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about essentially the real big story in Japanese news this week. It's the conclusion to quite a big saga. It's the fact that Trump and the Prime Minister of Japan, Ishiba, have finally, after a lot of build-up, had their meeting, which is quite nice for Ishiba, given all the pressure and the politicking in the background that's gone into this. So to give a bit of an overview, I've talked about this in the past of what's gone into this meeting. There's been quite a lot of pressure on Ishiba going into this and his eventual meeting with Trump. It's been delayed on a couple of occasions because I believe that Ishiba, when he was refueling on the way to a conference and he was landing in Los Angeles, he reached out to Trump's people seeking a meeting, and this is when Trump had been elected and had a mandate as the next president, but hadn't been sworn in yet. And Ishiba was looking to get an early meeting and then to be one of the first world leaders to meet him. But apparently that effort was rebuffed. Possibly Trump was too busy. And I think the excuse also could have been that Trump wasn't keen to meet with a leader because of the Logan Act. He felt that he shouldn't be conducting diplomacy before he was officially sworn in and meeting with a leader of a country, despite the fact that he went on to then meet with other leaders of the country before he was sworn in. In any case, he, for whatever reason, Ishiba was rebuffed. Then there was also the fact that Seinai, the politician who narrowly lost out after being the front-runner to become the leader of the LDP, which Ishiba now is, she apparently revealed about a week or two ago that she was offered the chance to meet with Trump, or it was floated by Trump's representatives. She claims that a meeting could have been set up, but she declined that only because she felt Ishiba should be the first to meet him. And also the fact that Trump has also met with Shinzo Abe's widow, apparently. Now, it's worth mentioning that Trump and Shinzo Abe, while he was Prime Minister of Japan, had a good working relationship. It's believed that they were very close and became friends. Apparently, Trump said some quite nice things about Abe and missing him and lamenting their good working relationship. Now, Abe, of course, is from the Abe faction of the LDP, and Ishiba is very much not, which Seinai, the leader who apparently was also offered a meeting him, she's from the Abe faction. Ishiba is more of an outsider. He's criticised elements of the Abe faction in the past. He's seen as quite separate to them. They're seen as more on the right of the party. And so, given Trump's good relationship with Abe, perhaps he sees Ishiba less as a natural ally, despite being from the same party and being the leader of Japan, being from the LDP, because he's not part of that Abe faction. Perhaps Trump's been less keen to meet with him for that reason. Or it could be that this was all politicking because Trump wanted certain concessions out of him, or to just pile on a little bit of pressure on Ishiba before their eventual meeting. There's also, prior to this meeting, obviously there's been talk of tariffs floating around with regard to the EU, Mexico, Canada, and also it's been speculated China and Japan could be facing tariffs. There were also concerns, and apparently this is why Seinai may have released this story about her being offered a meeting with Trump. There's also concerns that if this meeting hadn't happened fairly soon, that Ishiba may have met with China first, and possibly there's concerns that shows that the key strategic security alliance between Japan and the US is diminishing in importance. You know, it's a very important, traditionally, this alliance for Japan's security, trade, diplomatic status, all sorts of things. So it could weaken Ishiba's hand if he hasn't met Trump, and if things there seem to be freeing going into that meeting, and also B, it maybe suggests that perhaps China's could be more important for Japan than the USA, and it throws their whole traditional alliance into question. So it's seen as very important that they had this meeting first by some, and Ishiba could be quite pleased about that. Ishiba's taken this very seriously heading into the meeting. There's been talk of him having study sessions, talking to his predecessor, the previous Prime Minister of Japan, and Abe's widow, and sort of beefing up, going through these study sessions to talk to people who've met Trump and sort of strategizing how to handle the meeting, sort of doing homework, taking this very seriously. There were jokes that Ishiba might be getting out on the golf course, I believe, when he when Trump got elected in order to impress Trump. That sort of thing was flying around, but it looks like he to some extent kind of true that people are taking this very seriously and thinking about how best to please and impress Trump, if that study session thing is to be believed. He also made him a rather impressive gift. He presented Trump with a samurai-style helmet, which you might see from sort of the popular Shogun TV show, which came out recently and it has become very popular. Apparently this helmet was crafted from the region of Japan where Ishiba's from, and he instructed them to make it to still be practical to wear, but as far as possible to make it very impressive and gold. And gold is obviously a colour you'd associate with Trump, his hair, and his enormous wealth, and it's tied to his buildings, and it's sort of it's a colour associated with Trump. So he's tied it all together and given him this quite impressive tribute gift to this big really impressive samurai golden helmet to try and make an impression and make Trump happy. By all accounts, the meeting seems to have gone fairly well. At least he can say he's had the meeting after it looked like Trump was reluctant or was begging off for political reasons or just to apply a bit of pressure on Ishiba. But in any case, he got a note from Trump which said, Mr. PM, you will be a great people's prime minister. Best wishes. And so there's photos of them. They've got, the nice symbolic photo of Ishiba and Trump together. There's got the photo of him holding that note, which is a nice little PR coup for Ishiba to sort of settle nerves about this meeting finally happening. So he can be quite relieved about that. Perhaps not more relieved than pleased that this is finally over. But he's got that nice little, symbolic photo and a nice little PR victory to finally have that go through. There's also tariffs. It seem like they're not going through for now. They were not ruled out or permanently shelved or anything, but there was no talks of tariffs at the meeting, so it looks like that's been eased off a little bit for now. And you could speculate perhaps that if you look at the way Trump has got some concessions from Canada and Mexico, or he's looking for concessions regarding border control, drug control coming into the US, and there was talk of him applying tariffs on Canada and Mexico, you could speculate that maybe this whole thing of him playing up how close to Abe he was could also be very true. That it's been stated by people that they were close, and delaying a meeting with Ishiba. Maybe this was similar to him talking about tariffs on Canada and Mexico, that this whole thing was a gambit to get some sort of concessions out of Ishiba, and so the whole time it wasn't genuine reluctance, but perhaps he was just trying to get something back. Although maybe you never quite know with Trump. Maybe he genuinely was reluctant for whatever reason, and he prefers Abe. But in any case, it looks like there's been a couple of positives from Trump's point of view, a couple of wins from his point of view, which would lend to this idea that perhaps he was putting a little bit of pressure on Ishiba and delaying the meeting. One is that he's got a concession with regards to Nippon, not Nissan Steel, which is what Trump said during the meeting in a bit of a misspeak faux pas. He said Nissan Steel. Nippon Steel, there was talk of them going in and having this big takeover in the US of a steel company in the steel industry, which obviously is very important for security and also prestige construction, jobs, cost controls. Having a steel industry, for obvious reasons, is very important. But it looks like that talk of a big takeover has subsided, and instead Nippon Steel is going to make a big investment into the US, which can be seen as like a big win in terms of economic growth, prosperity, having that investment coming in and not having the concern of like such a key industry being taken over by a competitor from another country. So Trump can say that's a win in terms of preventing that takeover and having this extra investment. That looks very good for him. And also LNG. Now, Japan, of course, does have some natural resources, of course, but it's as an island, it's quite dependent on oil and gas exports coming in. I believe a lot of those are currently sourced from the UAE. That's a very important importer, I think, for Japan. But it looks like there's been a deal has been floated for them to get more LNG from the USA, which Trump will like in terms of it makes the US a more important exporter. It plays into the drill baby drill thing that Trump likes so much, and selling oil, and it also makes them important strategically for Japan to get such a key resource more from them, and so that can be seen as a big win for Trump also. And so on the whole, while Trump has got a couple of things, you could still market this as, I think, a good news for Ishiba that he's got through the meeting and that this is behind him. And like I say, he's got these upcoming meetings with China. So it takes away a sort of a weakness for him, and it sort of focuses his mind. He doesn't have to worry about the perception of him meeting China before Trump now. And so it sort of alleviates a problem for him going into those meetings. Now, speaking of China, there's also a big news story with regard to the Senkaku Islands. Now, if you're not aware, these islands are, I believe, located, you could say, somewhat between Japan, China, and Taiwan. Closer to Taiwan and off the coast of Okinawa, but they are claimed as Japanese territory and as part of Japan's exclusive economic zone, these islands, and that has been quite a hotbed of contention as China has sort of flexed its muscles in terms of moving its navy around and claiming different islands and parts of overseas territory in the past, and sort of naval maneuvers and things to sort of flex their muscles and sort of claim extra territory, claim extra sea zones, and that sort of thing. They've been quite bold in that respect in the last few years. Now, the Senkaku Islands have been claimed, like I say, by Japan. I think they claimed them because at the time when they moved in, they were not, I think, occupied, despite them being quite close to sort of Taiwan and close to the Chinese mainland, I think, than the Japanese mainland, but they are quite closer off the coast of Okinawa. Now, basically, this is overall a good news, it looks like, for Ishiba and Japan at the moment, because about a year ago, the Chinese placed a buoy out there, and they claimed that this was just purely to do sort of scientific measurements. They were just collecting water data, oceanographic data, that sort of thing is what they were claiming by putting the buoy out there. But the Japanese obviously saw this as quite a provocative move and a sort of a violation by putting it in the islands that are within their claimed exclusive economic zone. They saw that as very provocative, and there was quite a big stir about this and about Japan, what they saw as violating their territory. Now, obviously, it's just a buoy. It's not naval maneuvers or anything like that, but still seen as sort of, like I say, being a bit of a violation. Now, China has now removed this buoy recently, and their official statement is just they placed it for these, like I say, research scientific reasons. After a year, that campaign has now run its course, and they're saying as a sort of a natural next step, they've just removed it to collect the data. They say it's just the natural next step. It's not a gesture in any way. It was just their natural next step to remove it. Now, you could see this, if you look beyond that, perhaps, as possibly being them de-escalating tensions with Japan, or possibly offering a little bit of an olive branch, a little bit of an opening to sort of de-escalate tensions and remove that and offer Japan a little bit of a symbolic win without, of course, acknowledging it and just saying, oh, we're just removing it. We've got its data. It's run its course. And it's in very interesting timing with it being just ahead of the meeting, as I say, between Ishiba and Xi Jinping and this China-Japan meeting. It's very interesting, and perhaps it shows that China's open a bit to having a bit of an open discussion, closer relations maybe, or showing they're open to sort of a change of tack, maybe having close relations. We'll see what comes from that meeting, obviously. But from China's point of view, they can just claim, oh, we put it there for a year, we removed it naturally, but perhaps it is them sending a little bit of a gesture, is maybe what you could say. But in any case, Japan can be quite happy that that's a source of tension gone, and maybe it shows that if they want to, they can make some sort of progress in these Chinese talks, and at least it's a little bit of a thorn from their side in having an embarrassment of having this buoy there. It's now gone, and they can be quite relieved about that. So again, another piece of good news for Ishiba in that respect. And it's been quite a banner week for Ishiba. He's had 3 really quite good news stories. If you add on this third one, which is he's had quite a nice bump in the polls. I believe his cabinet approval rating is now gone up. Now, obviously, Ishiba's had a little bit of a turbulent start to his time as Prime Minister. He took over in difficult circumstances off the back of a couple of scandals, the church scandal and the LDP slush fund scandal. He then, hoping that his presence as like sort of a little bit of an LDP outsider, like I say, not part of the Abe faction, would maybe present a little bit of a chance for a fresh start for the party. He then very rapidly called an election, hoping that that would give him a fresh mandate, a chance to move on. But that did not go well for Ishiba. He lost the LDP's majority, and he's now had to form a minority government along with Komeito, and he's having to get legislation through. He's having to bargain and work with other parties. There was even a threat that if all the other parties were to club together, that the LDP might even have been forced out of government, although that didn't happen. Ishiba was able to remain as prime minister and the head of the LDP. But like I say, it's been quite turbulent and it's difficult, and he has to think a little bit more than he would have done to get legislation through. He has to work with other parties on a case-by-case basis to pass legislation, and it's made things quite difficult for him. As I say, he's not particularly had, I think, a big rise in the polls since he took over, despite, like I say, he was hoping he would be providing this fresh start. But now the Ishiba's cabinet rating has gone up 5 points, and it's gone to 44% according to a recent NHK poll. And I don't know if there's anything to do with it, but it's around the time of the Trump meeting. It's in the last few days that this was announced. So that, again, it's a quite nice positive story for Ishiba. He can now say he's had this success, or this relieved pressure with China ahead of his going to meet with them, and he can say that he's met Trump, that he's gone through the study sessions, he's worked to it, and he's now finally got the big photo op. He's met Trump, that he's got an open dialogue with Trump after this initial possible rebuff, and now he's got a little bit of a rise according to one poll, and his cabinet's a little bit more trusted. Possibly it's maybe I don't know about the timing of when this was conducted, when people were surveyed. Maybe it's to do with the Trump meeting. It's maybe a little bit soon for that. Could be possibly because he's been able to work more to pass financing bills along by working with the DPFP and looking to raise the tax burden and alleviate the amount of financial pressure on people. Perhaps that's why, or just because he's been in the job longer, perhaps people are warming up to him, and perhaps you could even say, this is only one poll, of course, but maybe the initial scandals, maybe they're wearing down and people are sort of reverting to how they used to feel about the LDP, maybe a little bit more positive. It's a little bit wishful thinking to jump into all that on the back of one poll, of course, but at least it's like nice, free, successive good news stories for Ishiba after quite a difficult start to his time as Prime Minister. So hopefully he can feel quite pleased about that from his point of view. And that sort of rounds out the political news. Like I say, the Trump meeting has really been the big story of the week in terms of Japanese politics. But I'd like to talk about, in any other news, a little bit of a strange story, which sort of highlights maybe what you think about Japan and its law and order, which is that there's a report that a woman was arrested for allegedly damaging a bun, a sweet treat, that worth only 181 yen, which I believe is about a little bit over $1, 110 US or something like a pound in UK currency. And for that, she was arrested for this alleged offence, which is quite strong, maybe a little bit of an overreaction. Now, this took place at a convenience store in Fukuoka. Now, she claims that she was purely pressing the bun to check its firmness, but the store claimed that it was damaged beyond the point that you could sell it. It wouldn't return to sort of its natural state. She pressed it too much, is what they're claiming, to damage it to the point they couldn't resell it. Now, this might seem, incredibly overzealous and harsh to arrest someone for just damaging something that's worth a very small amount of money, one item, and also incredibly overzealous that you could so swiftly arrest someone for this. Is someone really getting arrested for like every single minor offence in Japan? Well, no, not quite. Apparently, the reason this was able to happen was because the store was noticing a bit of a state of items being damaged, and so they were quite vigilant, looking out for someone to come in and damage it. I haven't read anything to suggest it's got anything to do with the same woman. It's just she was allegedly she was caught up in this as far as the arrest goes. Apparently, she pressed the bun, she would claim, just test it, but they would claim to the point of damaging it, and then she left the store without paying for the bun, at which point she was then restrained after she left the store without buying the damaged product. So it seems maybe to one hand very overzealous, a bit of an overreaction, but I don't know. I mean, in the UK we've got a bit of a spate of sadly not only theft but also violence within supermarkets. I think possibly tied to the cost of living here in the UK. And it's got to the point that there's been talk of specific legislation for harming people who work within shops, and also increasingly people within shops in the UK having to wear body cams. And I think there's a little bit of a feeling that some people would claim that things like theft are not being investigated very often or prosecuted very often, and that there's not enough bobbies on the beat, that sort of thing. So on the one extreme of causing a very relatively minor bit of damage allegedly, and then suddenly Japan seeming very overzealous and arresting you for that, versus staff feeling threatened and getting away with theft and that sort of thing. Maybe the Japan problem of being seen to be overzealous and persecuting such a tiny small crime is the one to have. But as I say, this is perhaps it's not quite true that Japan, despite its reputation for being so safe and secure, and perhaps for having quite diligently prosecuting and having such a high conviction rate, perhaps it's not the case that every single little crime like this will realistically be prosecuted and you'll be arrested immediately if you do just a tiny little bit of damage. It's just the case that in this one particular store they were quite vigilant because they were on the lookout. But the fact that it even happened in one occasion for such a small amount of damage, it does send quite an impression that someone would be arrested for 180 yen, about £1, $1 amount of damage. It's quite something. But I just thought that story stood out as really grabbing the eye, that someone would be prosecuted for such a small amount of damage. In any case, guys, that really rounds out the news, both political and otherwise. This has been the Japan Politics Podcast, and thank you so much for listening.